Hi viewers, this is Angela Moorjani from Kasturba Gandhi College in Hyderabad, and I welcome you to this session which I promise is going to be a lot of fun. I would like to begin by demonstrating two different methods of presentation before you today, and I want you to be the judge regarding which one of them is better. First, I want to say to you that I'd like to give you some advice. I want to say that it's really important for you to work hard and to save money, because there might come a day in your life when you are without a job or you are sick and you cannot earn, and at that time you will need to go back to your resources and draw from them. Do you think you would like that method of presentation? Or how about this one? This is a story about a colony of ants. These ants were getting together all the supplies which they had saved and dried during the summer. Now that winter had come and it was cold and there was no more grain available for them, they were storing all of this grain for the dry, cold winter months up ahead. Just at that moment, a grasshopper came flying by, and seeing that they had so much of food, the grasshopper asked the ants, "Would you please give me some food because I'm starving?" The ants asked him, "What were you doing during the summer months?" "Oh," the grasshopper replied, "when the sun was shining, I was flying all over the fields. I was singing songs and eating and sleeping and singing and eating and sleeping. And that's how I spent the summer months." "Well then," the ants replied to him in a very mocking tone, "now you can dance and go to bed hungry." Obviously, the moral of this story, written by Aesop, the Egyptian storyteller from the 5th or the 6th century BC, is that hard work is a virtue and it is its own reward. And those who don't work hard, they might have to go to bed hungry very often and might also have to do without many other things in life. If I were to make a rough guess, I would say that you would definitely prefer the second method of teaching, because that's something that you will remember for the rest of your life. And that is precisely how the fable was devised. Now, the fable is a literary genre or a type of writing in which an author makes use of allegorical figures to tell a moral, to preach or to teach, but he makes use of animals who have human characteristics and speak in just the same way that humans do. In India, we are no strangers to fables either. We have the Panchatantra tales from the 2nd century BC, which do the same thing. They make use of animals and other non-human characters in order to teach us very valuable lessons. In fact, if you have never read the Panchatantra tales, it might be a very good idea for you to go and get a copy and read it. Not only will you be much wiser at the end of that session, but you would have also had a lot of fun in the process. Now, a person who writes such stories or fables is called a fabulist. What a fabulous name to be called by. And today we are going to study the fable of a modern American fabulist called James Thurber. In his work, Thurber celebrates the comic frustrations and the eccentricities of the most ordinary of people. He was influenced by both his parents, but the predominant influence upon Thurber was that of his mother, of whom Thurber says she was a born comedian. Thurber is unique among the major literary giants of his time because he was an artist, a cartoonist, a short story writer, and a fabulist. For his inspiration, he drew from his own life, from all the funny incidents that happened to him throughout the course of his life, but he also did write on some darker themes, including madness and even murder. Of his classic works, the two that everybody must read are The Secret Life of Walter Mitty and The Greatest Man in the World. In addition to all the short stories that he wrote, Thurber wrote more than 75 fables. These always conformed to the literary genre of the fable, using anthropomorphic animals as their main characters, having a moral or a tagline which was often presented as a punchline, and Thurber used satire to criticize foibles of human life that he found in society. But he made sure to never do this like it sounded as advice, but rather as if he were laughing at humanity along with himself in the picture. In The Last Clock, the main characters are all ogres. Now you might be wondering what an ogre is. An ogre is an imaginary character that is huge, ugly and humanoid, often having a very big head and very hairy. Ogres can be lovable or scary. In the Hollywood series Shrek 1, 2, 3 and 4, those ogres are presented as being very endearing and cute. So much so that we are drawn to see their continuing saga over and over again. If you have never seen an ogre movie, maybe it's time that you went and saw one of the Shrek series. In an unspecified time frame and in an unknown location, an ogre had become very sick. He had become so ill from eating clocks. His wife, the ogress, had to break down the locked door of his castle, and when she entered in, she looked in dismay at the floor that was littered with clock parts. There were oily coils, springs, broken hands, and bits of pendulums everywhere. "Valsamala?" the ogre asked his wife. She didn't understand him because what he was trying to say was, "What's the matter?" But from eating so many clocks and the oil in them, all of his T's had turned into L's. The ogress had brought in a doctor to check him out, but the doctor was shocked at what he saw, and he said to the ogress that clearly this case was out of his area. When the ogre struck 3, he was so frightened that he wanted to run away. At first he suggested to the ogress that she call in a clockman, but then when he heard the slurred speech of the ogre, he changed his mind. He thought that perhaps the ogress should call in a syntax man or a semantist or a dictionist, somebody who dealt with words, because he felt that such a person would have the solution to the ogre's problem. Of course, we know that Thurber is making fun of doctors who often try to escape when they look at their patients and find out they have no clue what their patient is suffering from. They escape by saying that it's not their area of specialization. Taking the advice of the doctor, the ogress brings in a man with a big toolbox the next day, thinking that he's a clockman. But the clockman soon declares upon seeing the ogre that he is a clogman and not a clockman, and his area of specialization is to unclog pipes and drains that are blocked. Even if he could, the clogman is not interested in helping the beleaguered ogre. The ogress then brings in a general practitioner. But when the general practitioner comes in and sees the condition of the ogre, he quickly declares to the ogress that his area is to deal only with generals, and as such he cannot treat the ogre. Now desperate, the ogress brings in an inspirationalist. The inspirationalist says that if they will ignore the problem, then certainly in a few days the problem will disappear. Then the inspirationalist declares that the final experience should not be mamam. The ogress asks him, "What is mamam?" To which the inspirationalist replied, "That is what the final experience should not be." And with that, he went to sleep on their couch. It's obvious that Thurber is now criticizing all the self-styled godmen and life coaches whom people come to with very serious problems, but the advice which they give them is often meaningless and frivolous and hardly helps to solve their problems. But yet, people seem quite contented with their meaningless advice. The condition of the ogre worsened in the meantime as he ate all the clocks that he could find. From small alarm clocks to medium-sized mantelpiece clocks to larger clocks in the towers and grandfather clocks, he ate them all. And then he even ate watches, sprinkling them in between like salt and pepper. Soon the situation worsened and began to affect the whole town. Without clocks, people overslept. People stopped going to school and office. Factories had to be shut down and shops were closed. Even the trains stopped running and people just had to stay at home and do nothing. When the town council called an emergency meeting, the members came at all different times. Some didn't even come at all because they didn't know when to come. Finally, the case came to court for trial. The main accused, in this case the ogre, was charged with clock eating. First, a psychronologist was called to the stand. We can only assume that a psychronologist is some kind of a cross between a psychologist and a chronologist, chronology being the science of time. The psychronologist took the stand and said that as there was no evidence against the ogre, this case could not stand for trial. And with that, he left the courtroom. Obviously, again, Thurber is pointing a barb at all scientific people who refuse to face reality in the absence of concrete evidence. They deny reality, saying that this never happened. Three weeks after the ogre had consumed the last clock, he fell very ill. The chief diagnostician of the kingdom was called. The chief diagnostician said that the trouble is that we don't know what the trouble is. As there was no precedent of anyone having eaten clocks before, the chief diagnostician could not be sure of whether the ogre had clockosis, clockitis, cloccoma or clocktheria. Or it could even be a minor problem like clocking cough, ticking pox or clumps. Whatever the disease, right here and now they would have to establish a research team to study it and find out conclusively what the ogre was suffering from. The town council began to be concerned and they worried that soon the ogre might die. The chief diagnostician assured everybody that they should not worry, that if the ogre did die, then they would take care to bury him. The case was now shifted to the supreme prosecutor as it was getting more and more serious. Housewives came up and stated that they were no longer able to boil 3-minute eggs because they didn't have any clocks in their homes. Some people came and said that it must be the political party in power who was to blame. On examining this accusation, they found that there was no political party in power except the ogre himself. Doesn't that remind you of something? As they were getting nowhere, they decided to call for a summit conference with no agenda, because in a summit conference with no agenda, they would be able to impress such people as did get impressed by such events. Someone suggested that they go back to using sundials, but the problem with sundials is that they work only when the sun shines, and if the sun is shining, who cares about what time of day it is? At about this time, the sound of a clock ticking was heard. Shortly after that, it even struck the hour. There was such excitement in the courtroom. And soon, when they found the clock, the Supreme Magistrate suggested that they take it and install it in the clock tower. And soon, life in their town could return to normal. However, somebody raised a doubt. What if the ogre came and consumed that last clock as well? Just as if on cue, at that very moment, an announcer came in and declared that the ogre had died. As soon as this news spread through the courtroom, somebody came and stood upon the witness stand. He was a collector and he insisted that if indeed this was the very last clock, then it should be installed in the museum. Everybody agreed with him. And indeed, The collector went on to continue that as all the items in a museum don't perform any function, this clock also should not be wound, but it should be allowed to run down and stop. The next day at 9 minutes to 12, the clock ran down and stopped, and it was installed with all the proper ceremonies in the town museum. Soon life in the town came to a standstill. Factories had to shut down, nobody went to school anymore, churches were closed and shops remained with their shutters down. Very shortly, the people in the town all died. The sands of a nearby desert came and covered up this town. Eons and eons passed. After a long time, an adventure group from Venus was visiting the planet Earth. Two researchers, a man and a woman, got off their spaceship, and in the ruins that they found on Earth was the last clock. The Venusians looked at this object from every angle, but they could not figure out what purpose it must have served the people on this old planet. And so they decided to take it back to their planet. They labeled it Antique Mechanism, Function Uncertain. And they took it back along with many other strange relics from Earth to put a research team to it to find out how the people on Earth must have utilized all of these objects. By making use of the form of the fable, Thurber could achieve at least 4 different goals. The first thing that he could accomplish was artistic freedom. In a world where animals can speak and ogres can talk, anything is possible. That's the first benefit of using the fable as a form. Secondly, using the fable as his genre, Thurber is able to air his views on society and critique it without appearing to do so directly. There are 2 primary aims that Thurber has in his critique on society. The first thing that Thurber critiques about man is how he is driven by time. Time, or the clock, rules the life of every man, woman and child. And Thurber wants to show us that if you take time out of the picture or you destroy time from out of our lives, then our lives would also be destroyed. In fact, Thurber is issuing a strong warning that not only would life be destroyed, but we would also be extinct. The second aspect of human life that Thurber seeks to critique is modern man's obsession with technology. We want to research further and further into areas and refine the areas of study to a certain point where it's highly controlled and very specific. While this is good in one way, it also gives a way of escape to those who don't want to own responsibility. So very often you'll find doctors or professionals in other areas who don't want to take care of that situation or who don't care enough to find a solution for the problem at hand, escaping by saying, this is not my area is different. So it works both ways. Specialization is good, as well as it can be used wrongly by some people. Now, when we specialize, we also need new terminology to describe that specialization, and that's a subsidiary area that Thurber is critiquing. We create new words, we coin new phrases, and we are so creative at doing this. And this is another aspect of life that Thurber criticizes and satirizes in The Last Clock. Thirdly, using the fable also helps us to laugh at ourselves without belittling ourselves, because we laugh at the symbolic representations of human beings at one level, but at another level we are completely conscious that they are metaphoric representations of human beings. So we know that Thurber is talking about us, yet we can laugh because we are really laughing at the ogres. This artistic distancing helps us to enjoy poking fun at human beings. The fourth advantage that Thurber gains from using the genre of the fable is to do the ancient duty of the writer, which is also his ultimate duty, and that is to point out the truth of human nature. In pointing out this truth, Thurber is careful never to take on the tone of advising, but always seems to be laughing along with us at the queer traits of human beings. Using the guise of a fairy tale, Thurber can still satirize human behavior while at the same time he delights his readers all the way. It's a win-win situation. The somber streaks that run with the laughter in the fables is typical of Thurber. Thurber said in an interview, "It is very hard to divorce humor from other things in life. Humor is the other side of tragedy. Humor is a serious thing." Humor has always been serious for Thurber. Of the humorists of this century, he is one of the most complex, the most pessimistic, and also the most ambitious. Thurber's genius was to take despair and make out of it a humorous fable. Thurber then has not chosen just some form that was available, but he has chosen the only form which makes it possible to communicate the reality of our experience. He tells us about a world in which time has stopped. But this world is not our world, it's the world of the ogres. Yet at another level, we know that it can happen in our world. What begins by arousing our laughter, the incongruity between the imagined world and the possibility of this happening in our real world, turns into a comic representation of the reality of what really could happen in our world. In fact, it is a bizarre look at human life as it well could be if we don't watch after certain small things that are happening in our society.